4-H leader and a master gardener in Benton County. She lives on a small farm and grows and preserves food for her family. Please put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you. So Nellie, are you ready?
Well, I am, but I don't know why this is not working. Oh, did I do something wrong?
I don't know. What's not working?
Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Can you see all the other stuff too?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's
beautiful.
good. Maybe I'm good. Well, thank
You're
you.
good. It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's good. I enjoyed John's presentation. You know, I have a grazing yard. That way I don't have to come in and eat, but he only has 3/4 acre. I have 40. So, you know, it keeps me busy, but I grew up on a farm and I love farming. I've been preserving food since I could walk, because when we lived on the farm, we put up everything. And my mom and I would put up like 2,000 jars, fill the deep freeze full. She went shopping once a month. I thought that's how everybody lived till I got in the real world. And so I really have enjoyed food preservation, and I've been coordinating the Master Food Preserver program in Lane County since it started in 1980, and we have incredible volunteers. And one of the things we usually spend hours on is food preservation as a science, not a creative art, to teach our master food preservers how to do things properly so you don't get sick and die. And I always tell them, as a master gardener, you know, if I tell them to do something wrong, I'll kill the plant. But if a master food preserver tells them something wrong, you could kill the person. So one of the things, you can preserve your own food and you can enjoy your food, and it can be healthy and you can do it just how you like it. But one of the things to remind you is do it safely, because botulism toxin, if it gets into your canned food, it can be deadly, and we don't want anybody to do that. So as I say, food preservation is a science. And when Gwendolyn asked me, she wanted me to talk about why grandma's recipes might not be safe today. And I think that's a really good place to start, because things have changed over the years. I can remember canning with my mom, and we did a lot of canning of tomatoes and things, and we processed them for 5-10 minutes, and you stuck them down in the cellar and everything was great. Now that processing time has increased, if you did it that way, to 85 minutes. So things have really changed over the years. And as gardeners, you know, your fruits and vegetables are not exactly the same ones that they were 20, 30 years ago. They've changed. We got new varieties, you know, disease resistant, low sugar, high sugar, you know, you name it. They make it so that we like to eat it better. And a lot of this comes from the commercial end of it, where they're trying to please the public. Also, the cooking method has changed. You know, my parents immigrated here from Holland, and if you know Dutch people, they cook everything to death. And my mother even cooked the lettuce, because that's the way you did things, and everything was cooked to death, and you never opened a jar of green beans or stew meat or something unless you cooked it for at least 10 minutes. Well, we don't cook that way today. Everything is tender crisp, is done in the microwave. We open the jar, we eat and run. So we don't have that added margin of safety that we did in the old days, where we would destroy the toxin of botulism by cooking it. So that has changed. There's a lot of new equipment out there. You can get sucked into so much stuff and spend so much money on canning equipment that's really not necessary. But, you know, it's fun to have some of those new things. And then, of course, you're well aware that microorganisms have changed, and there's a lot more microorganisms, a lot different ones. A lot of them have mutated. I mean, you know, we're in a pandemic right now. So things have changed. So our processing times and ways we do things change. So let's see if I can get this to work. Out with the old, in with the new. There you go. On the left-hand side, you'll see, oh, that's my collection of historic cookbooks. I have a lot more. I have about 4 boxes of them. I use those. They're fun to look at. You get ideas from those. But if I'm going to do some home canning and I'm going to invent something, I go to the ones on the right. And kind of the Bibles today that are updated. The Ball Blue Book. I don't know if you realize, but they're on the 37th edition of the Ball Blue Book. Now, that doesn't mean that the 37th edition doesn't have some things from the first or second one in there, but it has changed. Every time something new comes out, new research comes out, then they'll put out a new edition, and they'll take out some recipes, they'll add some new ones. So always look for the newest editions of the Ball Blue Book. And they do have researchers on staff that actually, you know, do a lot of research. So we we feel pretty confident that their books are up to date and they're research based. The So Easy to Preserve book right here, we actually have, I think, a few copies at the Extension office, but you can order those through the University of Georgia Extension Service, and they mirror the USDA Complete Guide to Canning. And it's a wonderful resource book. We use it a lot. They're now on their 6th edition. So you can see they're changing as research changes. They add new recipes to kind of meet, they kind of look what commercially that people are buying a lot. And then they do some research on some of those products. And then they add some new recipes and some new things. Our Master Food Preserver Resource Notebook has a ton of things. You can't purchase that, but we use that as the basis for many of our publications that you can download online. We have a lot of our SP publications in there on specific vegetables and fruits. So if you want to can pears, it's not only canning pears, drying pears, pickling pears, everything you want to know about pears is on one sheet. So we have a lot of those that we've developed over the years. So what has changed? Well, processing times have lengthened a lot. No more paraffin. Oh gosh, I remember growing up and we had to be so careful with the paraffin that you got a really, really, really thin layer on that paraffin, because if you got a thick layer, it started to weep. And I can remember opening the ocean trunk down in the basement and the jams would all be full of paraffin. Oh, we just took them up, wiped them off, take off some of the paraffin, or take off some of the mold, and we eat them. Well, that's not like recommended today. If your jams and jellies mold, our recommendation is throw it out, because they found that jams and jellies are actually a liquid and the little legs go down in there and the whole thing could be contaminated. And some mold spores can actually provide toxins to make you very sick. Open kettle canning, if you know what that is, that was when you cooked everything, you had everything really hot. The jars were sterilized, the lids were really hot, the product was hot, you put it in and it sealed immediately, and then you stuck it down in your root cellar or your storage place and it was fine. We no longer recommend any open kettle canning or turning the jars upside down to seal them. I know that the jam companies did that for a while. That's no longer recommended, because you actually seal the microorganisms in the jar and they can multiply, and then you can have high spoilage. And we don't recommend oven canning anymore. Number one, the jars can blow up. Number two, the dry heat does not penetrate the jar at the same rate. And number three, you can ruin the tempering of your jar by oven heat, that dry heat. Back in the 90s and the 80s, they used to can breads. Oh man, it was so great. You'd have canned zucchini bread and you'd have canned pumpkin bread. Well, they discovered that's low acid food. There's not enough sugar in that. There's moisture in that. You seal them up, it makes an anaerobic condition, and they found botulism. So don't can any more breads, even though you can find those on the internet. You can find those recipes. New products that they have added in the last years, which is a lot of fun, is salsa. That's the #1 condiment today. And it's also the #1 cause of botulism today. So if you're going to can your salsa, you want to make sure you have a research-based tested recipe. And we have a whole publication on salsa that gives you really good recipes, including a choice salsa recipe that actually my Master Food Preservers were one of the groups that we tested a lot of the choice salsa recipes, and we sent them back to the National Center for Food Preservation to develop this recipe. So we actually have a say in that one, which is kind of cool. And you can do some different things by the proportions they have. We now have pie fillings that you can just like the wilderness pie fillings and those you purchase in the store. However, ours are much better because you can add extra fruit in them and they taste good, and you thicken them with clear gel, which you can purchase at our office, and you can make wonderful pie fillings. Low sugar jams have just been really popular now. Those have been added. There's some care we need to take with low sugar jams, that you only do it with high acid fruits, because if you do it with low acid products like peppers, those need to be high sugar, because the amount of sugar in there actually has something to do with the amount of water available to the microorganisms. And when you do low acid foods, and if you don't get enough acid added to it in the form of lemon juice or vinegar, botulism could be a problem. So low sugar jams and jellies should only be done with high acid foods. They also found out that our tomato products, oh yeah, they have low acid tomatoes. Really, there's no low acid tomato. What they've done is bred sugar genes into them. However, the pH of tomatoes does change they discovered by the time of the year. So in July, the pH is low. August, when it's really hot, the pH is low. But then as our days get cooler, the ultraviolet light gets less, like in September and early October, the pH gets really close to 4.6. So it could become a low acid food. And if the vines die, or the tomatoes are diseased, the pH also rises. So you only want to do them from healthy vines and before the vines die. I'm getting a lot of questions right now on Ask an Expert about blossom rot. Those tomatoes, you can eat them, but I wouldn't can them. You can dry them, you can freeze them, but they shouldn't be canned because the pH might be different. Figs are another one that are kind of borderline. Asian pears are borderline. Those need to be acidified with bottled lemon juice or citric acid to be safe. The questionable ones right now that we don't recommend canning is white peaches and elderberries. And I know elderberries are really popular right now, but the pH of elderberries can be 6.0 up to 6.0. So those are in research right now. And hopefully OSU is doing some research on them. We will have some canning times and recommendations for elderberries and white peaches, but for right now, we recommend that we freeze them. So it's more than pH. I get this all the time. I have those test strips, and I have my garden pH meter for soil, and I also bought one for food. All I need to do is test the pH, and then I can just compare it to some other fruit that has that pH, and then I can just figure out a processing time. No, it's more than just pH. pH is one of the things. Is it an acid food or a low acid food? The consistency of the food, the density of the food, how thick is it in the jar? What other ingredients did you add to it that are low acid that might be? Did you add some other acid to it? You know, different types of things. How long did you cook it? Whether it's a quart jar, a pint jar, half pint jar, those all are consideration. How the heat penetrates the jar, because there's a cold spot in the jar, and it has to heat to a certain temperature in order to kill the bacteria that will cause spoilage in that particular product. So there's a lot that goes into it. Is it hot packed? Do you cook the food first before you put it in the jar, or is it raw packed? That all determines the processing time. And then how does the heat penetrate? Is it done in a pressure canner, a water bath canner? Is it conduction currents, convection current? All that is taken into consideration. If you ever went to a commercial lab, you should see every product they do, what a rigmarole it goes through before they ever can put that commercially. And we can't do that at home. So we suggest using research-based recipes. Okay, equipment has changed. You can see the water bath canners right here. You don't have to have a fancy canner for a water bath canner. It needs to be a container big enough that you can put the jars on a rack, and you have at least 1 inch of water boiling over the top of the jars. And so, you know, if you're doing half pint jars, sometimes I just use my little soup kettle, but I do have a water bath canner. This canner over here is a steam canner. Those have been popular for years, but the research that was done on those years ago when they were invented was never published, and it's never, you know, had a couple different groups researching it. So we never did recommend it. But the University of Wisconsin Extension Service did some extensive research on it a couple of years ago, and we now have recommendations for using that. I love my steam canner. It uses a lot less water. I think it's a little quicker than the water bath canner, and I think my fruit turns out a little bit, I personally think my fruit turns out a little bit firmer than the water bath canner. So I use it a lot, but the problem is you could only use it in food that has a processing time of 45 minutes or less, not over, because it can burn dry, and you need to be really careful it doesn't burn dry. Then there's some electric water bath canners out here. This is my wick canner I've had for years. It's great. I can can outside on that. Ball also has a water bath canner. Those work really, really good. They also have jam makers out there that you can use. Pressure canners are another. There's basically two kinds of pressure canners out. This is for all. These on here are for high acid foods. So all your fruits, your jams and jellies, and your pickles can be done in the water bath canner. Now, if you're doing vegetables, meats, fish, poultry, you need the pressure canner because those are the botulism risk. And so there's basically two kinds out. There's a weighted gauge canner and a dial gauge canner. And both of them work really well. If you have a dial gauge, you need to have it checked once a year, and we do that at the extension office. Right now, there is no electric canner, even though the Presto one says that they're research-based and the temperature doesn't fluctuate during the processing time, it has not been researched by an independent researcher to prove that they are not, that it is correct. So right now we're waiting for that research to happen, and hopefully it will. But right now we do not recommend any electric pressure canner, especially not the Instant Pot, even though it's advertised that you can do it, because the pressure fluctuates. In order to kill botulism spores, it has to be a constant temperature for a certain period of time. And if you fluctuate the pressure, you might not kill the spores, and then the toxin can form. Okay, so do's use up-to-date canning instructions. All acid foods in a water bath or a steam canner. Can all low acid foods in a pressure canner. Your dial gauges need to be checked once a year. And I said, we do that free of charge at the extension office. Right now our office is closed, so call for an appointment and they'll check your canner lid. You just need to bring the lid in. If you have a weighted gauge canner, then you don't have to have it checked. And if you have a dial gauge canner, you can actually convert it to a weighted gauge canner, which I really love, because then you got the jiggler on one side and you got the gauge to check. But if you have a weighted gauge and a dial gauge on one canner, always go by the weight, not by the dial. It's more accurate than the dial is. And then can quality produce. Don't can overripe fruit or from dead mines. Number one, it's not going to taste very good. That's going to be soft and soggy, and flavor's not going to be very good. But the pH also changes on overripe fruit, so don't can those. But you can freeze those or dry them. And then the best of all, store your canned foods in a cool, dry, dark location, and they'll be good for a year to 18 months. They'll keep their quality. But if you store them like in the garage this summer when we were up to 110 and then it cools down in the winter and whatever, that fluctuation really destroys the quality of your food. It'll still be safe to eat, but the quality won't be that great. So those are just some tip guidelines. So what can you do to be creative? Because everybody likes to be creative and make it themselves. You can add more acid to foods. That's not going to be a safety issue. If you don't like cider vinegar and it calls for white distilled, you can, any vinegar as long as it's 5%. If you like organic vinegar, as long as it says 5% on the label, make sure that it says 5% because there are vinegars coming out now that are not 5%, and those might not be safe. You can also increase the acid ingredients. So let's say you're making fruit chutney and you really don't want all those onions in there, but you'd like to add some more pears. That's not a safety issue. And you could always decrease the low acid foods and replace it with acid foods, the vegetables. Like in salsa, you can add more tomatoes and less peppers, or you could add more peppers and less onions, but don't increase the low acid foods because it could be a safety issue. You don't have to add salt unless you're fermenting. You don't have to add salt to your vegetables. Salt is actually a flavor enhancer. So if you don't want to add salt, that's fine. Sugar is the same way. You can adjust the sweeteners on some recipes. When the sugar is there as a preservative, like in a high sugar jam and jelly made from a low acid food, yes, then you don't want to disturb the sugar. But if I don't want to can my pears in sugar and I want to can them in orange juice, that's not a problem. If I want to can them in water, that's okay. That's not a safety issue. It will be a quality issue, however. So when you decide to can something and reduce the sugar or use alternative sweeteners or whatever, make sure you boil some of the fruit in it and cool it down and taste it and see if you like it, because it will change the flavor, the texture, the coloring of it, and you might not like it. I had a really good example. I was really going to be really good, and I used to can everything in a medium syrup. You know, that was the old time. Oh, you know, and then, oh, you're not supposed to do that. So we went to low all in 1 year. And nobody would eat it. It didn't taste the same. I made a lot of fruit leather out of my canned food that year. And so gradually reduce the amount of sugar. We're much more used to it now, and now nobody really cares. But if you've always done it with one way before you change, you know, do dry a sample, and by boiling it in that, whatever you're going to can it in, cool it down, taste it, see if you really like it. Be careful with adding chocolate, because chocolate can change the pH of the product. There are a few tested recipes in the new Ball Blue Book. or not the blue book, the new ball book, the one that comes out of Canada, has a lot of really good recipes in it for adding like chocolate to strawberry jam. I think it's a raspberry jam that's really tasty, but don't just start adding chocolate because it does change the pH. High alcohol liquids like brandy and those types of things, adding some vanilla to jams and jellies, that's not a safety issue. And all wines have a pH of less than 4, pH of 4, so you can add that. So if you wanted to can your peaches in, I'm just saying that, in white wine, you could do that, and it's not going to change the safety of it. So you can be a little bit creative, but be careful. Always call the hotline if you really have a question. So if canning scares you, and it does scare, what can you do? Well, you can try freezing. I love to freeze. I have 3 deep freezers full of food. In fact, I have to clean them out to get my half a beef in there. But I freeze a lot of things because it's the easiest way to do it. And it's also the most like fresh, and they say it's the most nutritious way if you do it correctly. However, you have to run the deep freeze 24/7. So, it costs more than some of the other methods, and not everybody has room to have a deep freeze. So always can young tender vegetables and fully ripe fruit. The better the quality that you put in, the better quality will come out. Blanch most vegetables before freezing, and John alluded to that too. If you don't blanch them, the enzymes make them mature and tough, and they don't taste very good. Wrap them well in freezer bags. My mother was very frugal, but boy, when it came to freezing, she used lots of paper, the best bags, the best containers she could, and things kept really well. Freeze quickly and store at 0 degrees and below. And for best quality use within 1 year. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use it after 1 year, but the quality will go down. And again, depending on your freezer and how well you packaged it. We always get questions. We got a turkey in there and it's 3 years old. Can I still eat it? Yeah, you can eat it. You might not want to, but it's not going to kill you. But the quality will down. Some of my favorite things, I love canned peaches in orange juice. If you've never done that, try that. I just take frozen orange juice, dilute it for drinking, add a little bit of sugar, and put my peaches in it. Oh my gosh, it's the die for. We eat it as dessert. If you want to make a peach pie in the middle of the winter, drain off the orange juice, thicken it with clear gel, put the peaches in it, and they'll wonder how you made such a wonderful pie. I freeze my strawberries. I take my old outdated pectin, mix it with some sugar, and put it with my sliced strawberries. It kind of thickens the juice. It keeps the strawberries bright red, and it's great on waffles, pancakes, and strawberry sundaes. Applesauce, I freeze a lot of applesauce. It tastes so much like fresh. I do can some, but I do like the frozen. I do a lot of cooked pumpkin because it's hard to can pumpkin. You have to do it in chunks. I cook up my pumpkin as puree and put it in bags, freeze them flat. Then I can make pumpkin pie, add it to soup. Squash I sometimes do in chunks for a side dish. Shredded zucchini, of course. And I don't know if you shred, I shred and blanch my cabbage and kale, and they make great side dishes. Kale mixed with a little mushroom soup is a wonderful side dish. Sweet corn is my favorite. And cookie dough, I always make a huge batch of cookie dough, and I freeze half the dough and then just cook it as I need, bake it as I need it. And I always have fresh cookies, and they wonder how I do that, but don't tell them how I do it. And then soups and quick meals. So freezers can be a great thing. And drying, John dries a lot. I dry a lot too. I dry most of my stuff in the wintertime. I dry stuff in the freezer. Canned goods don't look very good anymore. Oh, they dry marvelously. I make lots of fruit leathers for my grandsons, fruit drops, pumpkin leather. If you've never done that before, that is really great. You make it like pumpkin pie. You pureed pumpkin and add, the pumpkin pie spices, little brown sugar, and dry it like a leather. Then if you want to make pumpkin butter, just add a little bit of boiled orange juice to it, or apple juice, or even water, and it turns into pumpkin butter. Pizza leather is great. Even old salsa that you have left over, grind it up and make salsa leather. Fruit drops, dried fruit, and seasoned tomatoes. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview, and I think I'm about right on time. We have about 5 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I usually do this in 3 hours, see, so I had to do it in 20 minutes.
Wow. I don't know if you can speak any faster.
I know. See, I'm really good at that. I can get it all in. There was so much more that I would like to include, but that was a quick overview. Yes.
Yeah.
And I have one more slide at the end that kind of gives you all our resources. So I'll put that up when we get done.
Yes. And our question is how do I know if my food is low acid?
Well, how do you know if it's a vegetable, a meat, a fish, or poultry? It will be low acid. If it's a fruit, if it's not on the overripe side, firm, ripe fruit, it would be in the acid group. So if you just look for the different foods, if they have a processing time for it, then you know that it will be follow into that group.
Okay, so yeah. What's your favorite pickle recipe?
Well, it depends on which kind of pickles, but my favorite pickle recipe for dill pickles is the quick dills, the kosher dills that's in our pickle publication, PNW 355. It's a wonderful pickle recipe. And then I like to process the dill pickles in the low temperature pasteurizations. That's how they do the pickles commercially. And they stay nice and firm, and you don't have to add the firming agents to them and all that. And my pickles turn out good. I've never had me turn them down. In fact, I just did 18 quarts to give away as Christmas presents. And I love the bread and butter pickles that are in there too. So those are my favorites. My husband doesn't eat pickles at all, but I do like those two. Those two are my favorite, bread and butters and the quick dills.
Okay, what fridge dill pickle recipe do you recommend?
What was that?
What refrigerator dill
pickles?
Yes.
I'm not much into refrigerator pickles because they did do a recall on those. I mean, they recalled the recipe on the refrigerator pickles because any of the recipes you could refrigerate, you can make them and refrigerate. The problem with refrigerator dills, there could be a safety issue if it sets on the counter for a few days before you put it in the refrigerator. You could pick up some listeria that grows in the refrigerator. But there's a lot of recipes for refrigerator dill. It's not a huge issue because it's in the refrigerator at refrigerator temperature. So if you're really clean when you make it and put it in there, then it will be safe. And so I'm not an expert on that. I'll have to tell you that. I mean, I like my dill pickles and I keep them in the refrigerator for months once I open the jar, and I'm not going to waste my refrigerator space by having refrigerator pickles in the, you know what I mean, to have them cure in there. Just remember, pickles are like a good wine. You make them and then it takes at least 6 weeks for them to really get good. You know what I mean? So don't make your pickles and then just eat them right away. Let them cure. Hide them and let them cure.
Just to add on to that, refrigerator pickles, are you saying that keeping them in the refrigerator for how long can you keep, let's say, fresh cucumbers in a brine in a refrigerator?
A lot depends on if it's contaminated with anything from your refrigerator, you know what I mean? It's mold or whatever. As long as they're firm and not slimy and they smell like a pickle, they'll be safe to eat. It could be a year. I've had pickles in my refrigerator for a year. But if they start getting slimy and they have an off flavor and they smell funny, then throw them out. But it's not going to be a botulism issue.
Okay, that's good clarification.
It's a quality issue, not a. It's a quality issue, not a safety issue.
We have a question of how long can you keep homemade applesauce in the freezer?
How can you keep?
How long can you keep homemade applesauce in the freezer?
The freezer? Well, as I said, depending on how you package it. If you package it in really good freezer containers, a good year. I still have from last year's in there. I'm eating them and it tastes really, really good. In the freezer, it's quality, not safety. If it was safe when it went in, it's safe when it comes out. It might not be fit to eat. Just as a little fact, I'm going to put it in my newsletter for my volunteers, but we just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. And guess what I had in my freezer? I had the groom's cake from 50 years ago, and I served it to my husband. And he was going, "You got to be kidding me." And the family was all there and we tasted, the nuts were not even rancid. So let me tell you, brandy must do a lot of things. It wasn't even dried out. It was still moist 50 years ago. So as I say, if it was in the freezer and it was safe when it went in, and it's safe when it goes out, but who knows what it's going to taste like. So that's my rule of thumb. If you meet two, people say, oh, it's past the expiration date. Well, if it's in the freezer, it's going to be okay. If it's not moldy and it's not slimy, but it wouldn't happen if your freezer keeps running. But if the freezer heats up, then you could have some spoilage.
Yeah. Just had a question in our chat line that I thought I might want to send to you and she said, she or he, I made white wine tomato bruschetta. I was concerned about the amount of liquid per jar to make sure it was safe.
I'd have to see the recipe. You can't just look at a recipe and say this is safe or not. The more liquid is probably better because, especially with the wine, because it's acidic. But I don't know, there's not a lot of research-based recipes for that. So people are making those up and there's a lot of them on the internet. I'm really hesitant people going to the internet and getting their recipes and then making them. There's some good groups on there. I joined some Facebook food preservation sites just to see what people are doing. And there's some of them are really good. The Ball Facebook is pretty good. The people are pretty good. There's also some on there that, oh my gosh, what are they saying? You kind of question what they're doing. So always double and check and see if you can find it in one of those reference that I said, or call our hotline and ask my master food preservers. They can do some research and tell you if it, could be a safety issue.
Okay, so and Jet just put in the chat the phone number for your master food preservers. That's 541-344-4885, and that might be a place where this person could direct their question.
That actually is not correct. I mean, that is our line. That is our line that we use. What are we doing here? I have one more slide here. I can't find it. The number is 1-800-354-7319.
Okay, 1-800-354-7319, and that may be the place to direct that question.
That now is a live line, and you will it's open Monday through Friday, and we have master food preservers on board from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Okay.
The rest of the year, you can call that other number and it's a message line and they'll get back to you, but they're really good about answering the questions. And if they don't know the answer, they either call me or they call our specialist at OSU and research the answer for you. So call the hotline because they're very good.
Yes, thank you. This was wonderful information. I'm going to turn it back to